I'm sorry, I didn't have my gavel. I apologize. First, this is the Joint Legislative Committee on Compilation, Revision, and Publication of Legislation. The Speaker and I jointly chair this on opposite years. So I'd like to introduce Angela Cockerham is here from the House. Tommy Reynolds is here from the House on time. Please note that. I remember Tommy. Jason White is here, our President Pro Tem. Shonda Yates is here. Jennifer Branning is not present. Joey Fillingane, Senator Fillingane is here. Hillman Fraser is on teleconference. Our President Pro Tem Dean Kirby is here. Senator Daniel Sparks is here, and Senator Joseph Thomas is here. So we have a quorum of our committee, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ronnie Frith, let's go.
Look at your handout. It should be in order. It's Mississippi Code error. For those of y'all who were here last week, I gave you some of the background. I'm going to give you a real quick statement of the authority of the committee to correct errors. List the powers and duties of the committee. And one of them is to correct manifest typographical and grammatical error.
You have to hit your green button right in the middle, the one right in the middle. There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't working?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, now, okay, yeah, big difference. All right. The authority for the committee to correct manifest errors is in the statutory list of powers and duties of the committee in preparing laws passed by the legislature for preparation of publication in the code. Now, I want to emphasize that the authority to correct manifest errors is really not that broad. The committee can only correct minor non-substantive errors. It's not authorized to rewrite language in a statute or bill in any way that would change the substance of what was enacted by the legislature, such as deleting a sentence or rewriting a provision to change the meaning. If it did, if y'all did that, you'd be legislating, which only the legislature can do, and you can't, legislature can't delegate the power to legislate to a committee or any other entity. Now, the standard that we use in determining whether it meets the criteria of a manifest error, the statute doesn't say this, but we just had to come up with this over the years. Bubba Neely was the former Senate co-counsel. I'm House co-counsel, and we came up with this years ago. Manifest patent error is one that basically you can look at it and tell that it's wrong. Now, obviously, sometimes you can't tell that a code section reference is wrong, but basically just simply easy determination that it's wrong. And not only that, how it should be changed, what it should be changed to needs to be apparent too. Without talking to anybody, without somebody saying, oh, here's what we intended, here's what we meant. And I will tell you this, if there's any doubt about it, we don't recommend changing. So I have no doubts about these. You may, that's fine. What I've done, and you can see, years ago, I thought, well, what's the best way to present this? You don't want to go through 25, 50 errors. So what I did it in order of code section. It had the change, state what the change is, delete, insert, whatever. And then if it would help, I took a phrase out of the bill or the code section showing how it is worded now and how it would be worded as corrected. And then I have an explanation in parentheses at the end. So what I'd like to do, Lieutenant Governor, is you were here last year. I usually pick a few to show you examples, show them examples of what type changes there are. Usually you give them, the chairman gives them a few minutes to ask questions. I have copies of all these statutes. If you have any questions, I can read it in the more in the context than what I've given you here. But if you look, for example, on the first page, that 23.7, the explanation is that there was some language that was repeated in the middle of a sentence, and you can tell it's wrong. And we could tell it was wrong, thought about it, talked about it, and said that that doesn't need to be in there. The second one, 27-1956.5.4, the word of was left out. And the next one, the word of was left out. The word may was left out. The one at the end of page 1, this happens sometimes. You add a new paragraph and then you renumber the succeeding paragraphs, but now they're references to the succeeding paragraphs that are now wrong because they weren't changed. I think the one that I do want to point out as an example, because it probably looks more substantive than anything, is look at the second page on line on 35-321. Senate Bill 2165. Senate Bill 2165 was changing the requirements for somebody to be a veterans service officer. And the current law said, for the bill, said they had to be an honorably discharged or honorably released veteran of any war or police action in which the armed forces of the U.S. have been or shall be committed for action. The bill deleted the reference to of any war or police action. So, but they left in which the armed forces have been or shall be committed for action. And we talked about it, Ian and I talked about it, and we said, can we do that? Can we not do that? And we can't see any other way where that is not a modifying phrase of what war is. A war in which the armed forces have been or shall be committed for action. From the context, we think that phrase in which the armed forces of the U.S. have been or shall be committed for action, we're modifying the types of wars that was deleted. Again, we looked at it in context. We looked at it, does the sentence make sense now? Well, veterans in which the armed forces have been or shall be committed for action. So you can see that's one that's not as simple as some of the others, but from the context, we felt like that it was a manifest error, and we didn't have to look and talk to somebody, do any research. It looked like on its face that it was an adjective clause modifying the types of wars. At the bottom of page 2, ensure with an E rather than IN. It's just a different grammatical change. At the top of page 3, there's.
I think, Mr. Frith, your idea was accurate. There, as you see there, I'll give the committee a few moments to page through these, but I have individually, and we'll just stop there and ask if there's any questions, and let me give you about a minute. Most of these, as you will see, is one line, one word, inmates versus inmates, a section left out, imposed left out. I mean, you can look through these. I'm going to give each of y'all a minute to page through the sections, and then we'll respond, as Mr. Frith said, we have in the past, which is an adoption unless there are any specific questions. But quite frankly, I think the one that he covered was the one with had the most different. Sometimes they misspelled ensure, it was IN and it should be an EN, but all the rest of them are just very minute changes, pluralization or a reference. So why don't we give everybody a minute here, Mr. Frith, and then we'll let everybody page through, and I'll call you back to action as soon as you get through the last 3 or 4 pages of that. And then we'll ask for any questions. If not, we'll ask for adoption pursuant to Mr. Frith's recommendations. All right, so we'll give him a minute.
Yes,
All right, we'll give you a minute. Yes, sir.
Actually, I was here before you.
He's talking about when you got sworn in.
Oh, yeah. We graduated together.
Was he grandfathered in? Do you remember, Tommy?
Yes. We both were. Diploma privilege.
All right, everybody take a last look here and we'll move along here. We got some other stuff I want to cover. You can see some of the explanations in there that was referred to twice, that kind of thing. We're ready to go. Representative White, President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that the committee accept the correction of these code errors and that we adopt them in their entirety as presented to the committee here today.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Governor. I'll be referring to this booklet that you have in your packets. One of the important roles of the Code Committee is to integrate amendments to a single code section that are made by more than one bill. And the reason that's so important is that if you weren't here to do that, some of the amendments would be lost, amendments that the legislature intended to make. On the top of page 1 of your packet gives the statutory authority for the committee to do that. Last year, I went through in a good bit of detail what the statute said and what the policies of the committee are. I wasn't planning on going in as much detail this year. It takes a little while to do that. So I was planning on just summing up for you. Basically, once you put all this together on the first 2 pages of your packet, what we're left with is a 3-question inquiry for how to handle code sections that are amended by more than one bill in a single session. And the first question we ask ourselves is there any controlling language in any of the bills? Does Bill 2 specify on its face an intent to control over Bill 1 with respect to a particular code section? If it does, if that language is there, then we're done. We look at Bill 2, we put Bill 1 aside. But if that language isn't there in any of the bills, then we move to question 2, which is, are the amendments standalone amendments? And what that means is, do they not conflict with each other and do they not overlap with each other? So Bill 1 makes an amendment to the code section up here. Bill 2 has a completely different project in mind, and it makes an amendment to the code section down here. By looking at that, we can pretty clearly presume the legislature meant to do both. It passed Bill 1, checked it off its list, and then moved on to the next project. Did not intend to override Bill 1 when it passed Bill 2. So those are the code sections on pages 3 through 6 of your packet, the ones that have a single asterisk next to them. Those are the ones that are eligible to be merged because they're standalone amendments. So we presume the legislative intent was for all of those to be incorporated into the code. But if the amendments are not standalone, and if there's no controlling language in any bills, then we move to the third point, which is governed by section 1379, which basically says the latest bill amending that code section is the one that controls. And the latest bill means the one with the latest effective date. If the effective dates are the same, then it's the one with the latest signature date. And in those cases, that latest one controls at the expense of the others. And those are the situations with the double asterisk next to those code sections. So that's the way the code sections work. Under the committee's policies that it adopted, for the sake of consistency and for the sake of effectuating legislative intent, if the code sections can be merged, they will be merged. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to look through pages 3 through 6, to answer any questions you may have. And then I'll take you through the code sections that you'll be asked to merge, and starting on page 7. And you'll see on pages 3 through 6, the underlined bill is the one that controls either because it has a controlling language or because it has the later effective date or the later signature date. Every single section has a bill underlined because we haven't merged them yet. So as of right now, there is one that controls.
So your changes will be on yellow?
Yes, sir. The yellow changes are the ones made by the non-controlling bill, the changes that would be lost if the committee didn't vote to merge. The changes that are already in the law made by the controlling bill are not highlighted.
Okay, Representative White.
Thank you. That's correct. Yes.
Representative Reynolds.
That's right. I mean, the substantive change would be the fact that amendments that are not currently in the law go back into the law, but they're amendments that the legislature intended to make. So,
Hey, Phil.
well,
How you doing, bud?
if what you're asking is there any legislation going on in this vote to merge, then the answer is no. The committee's not re-legislating. It's just giving effect to the intention of the legislature in the last session. It's word for word, everything in both bills going into the code section. Are we right? That's right. No, nothing's changed from what you thought you passed, drastically or otherwise. We ready to go through the merge sections?
Yeah, and let's start with your golf carts on page 7.
Yes, sir. So starting with page 7, section 2719.3, House Bill 1195 controls because of its later effective date. What it does is to exempt electric bicycles from the definitions of motor vehicle and motorcycle. The changes made by Senate Bill 2605 would be lost if this committee didn't vote to merge them. 2605 exempts golf carts and low-speed vehicles from the motor vehicle definition. So that's an example of two bills doing different things, different projects. The legislature intended to do both. Since those changes are non-overlapping, the committee should merge them to give full effect to both bills. Moving on to section 2751.5.
What page?
That's on page 15. The change is on the next page. It's the same situation as above, just a different code section. It's the same two bills, the same situation with how they changed the motor vehicle definition. So again, merger is needed. Then lower down on page 16, 27-104-205. House Bill 1284 controls because of its later effective date. That bill deletes the DOR license tag from the agency expenses that are defrayed by appropriation from the general fund. House Bill 106, the non-controlling bill, amends that same paragraph elsewhere by specifying that the State Fire Academy Workforce Program Fund isn't included with the other expenses of the State Fire Academy in the list of expenses covered from the general fund. So to give effect to both non-overlapping amendments, the committee will need to vote to integrate them.
I checked on this. That fund has about $1,000 in it. It's not a major amount of money.
Um,
I said the fund was about $1,000. So there was not any real money in that program fund that you would be lost here. No, not at all. I think it's fine.
Page 18 has section 31713. These two bills have the same effective date. So House Bill 1197 controls because it has a later signature date. The change it makes to this long section is easy to miss. It simply deletes the words dual phase from the heading of subsection M 31 XXXI. That's on page 45. The non-controlling bill adds the language and term contracts as provided in paragraph N of this section to the list of public contracts for which reverse auction isn't to be used. In addition, you'll see that it changes, I think it changes the word there to his on page 19. So
On 21, you're on 21 there, Ian?
I,
Or are you back on page 19?
19 and 21 both. 21 is the substantive change. 19 is just changing a pronoun.
Right. That's right.
So those are both changes that would be lost if we didn't merge. So that's that. And then the next section, you flip all the way to page 53. And that's section 31-1927. The controlling bill is 1095 due to its later effective date. It adds a new subsection at the end, further clarifying what's meant by a doubtful claim in the prior subsection. House Bill 359, the non-controlling bill, adds to the existing list of types of debts considered to be doubtful claims. That highlighted language there on page 53. That would be wiped out if it weren't integrated. So then we move down to next page, 54. Section 4775. These two bills have the same effective date, so the later signature date controls, which is 2795. And in this case, both bills actually do the same thing to this code section. They delete wording in subsection 2 with the effect of removing the prohibition on the state parole board members from receiving compensation or per diem. The only difference is that the non-controlling bill adds the words or her after the word his to his salary. So this is an instance where there's really no legal difference since the code already contains a provision stating that the masculine pronoun includes the feminine. That's in section 1317. But the principle of integration is that all non-conflicting and non-overlapping amendments should be merged to give effect to the legislative intent. So even though there would be no legal effect, if this weren't merged, it's still a proper case for integration of the text. The next code section is 6315. That starts on page 57. 3 bills amend this code section, and you see it says see detailed because it's a little more complicated. Senate Bill 2598 includes language controlling over House Bill 550. So we ignore 550 in favor of 2598. However, it doesn't control over 2294, and 2294 is the one with the latest effective date. So that's the one that controls overall. So if we don't merge the amendments, then the changes made by 2598 are lost. As elsewhere, 2598 deletes references to an intermediate driver's license. The controlling bill, 2294, adds language pertaining to the veteran's driver's license. So they're non-overlapping amendments that are appropriate for merger. Going down on page 59 to section 631755. They have the same effective date, so 1195 controls because of its later signature date. Like the first couple of sections on this list, 1195 excludes electric bicycles from the definition of motor vehicle. 746, the non-controlling bill, adds new definitions at the end of the section. Those definitions are clearly meant to be in that code section, so merger is needed to preserve them. Those definitions start on page 67. And then at the bottom of page 68, we have section 63-17-155. It's the same scenario as we've already visited. 1195 controls because it has a later effective date. It excludes electric bicycles from the motor vehicle definition. 2605 excludes golf carts and low-speed vehicles from the same definition. So merger is needed to preserve that exclusion. Moving on to 6717 on page 70. 2606 controls, because of its later effective date, it contains a very simple conforming amendment, adding the word native spirits after native wines on page 71. That was the bill last year that basically created a native spirit law that paralleled the native wine law. So this was just a conforming amendment in that. The non-controlling bill 2807, what it did was to restore language to this section that had been inadvertently deleted in the 2000 session. It's a bigger amendment, but it would be lost without the committee voting to merge it. Page 72 has section 73-17-11. House Bill 1263 controls because of a later effective date. It contains a conforming amendment allowing the issuance of a license by reciprocity to a person establishing residence in this state and adding another code section to regulate that issuance. Again, the non-controlling bill has the bigger substantive amendments, which would be wiped out without merger. It adds a new subsection 2 authorizing criminal history records checks on applicants for nursing home administrator licenses. It also raises the license fees from $500 to $550. And the last subsection is amended to delete the repealer and replace it with an exemption from the continuing education requirements for legislatures serving on the Public Health Committee or the Medicaid Committee. So voting to integrate will preserve those amendments. 73-54-23 is on page 77. And this is the last one. This is one where we have two bills, not only with the same effective date, but also the same signature date. So the one that controls is the one that was signed at a later time. Senate Bill 2420 controls because it was signed 39 minutes later than House Bill 1263. The controlling bill changes a code section reference and then adds a new subsection allowing the Board of Examiners for social workers and marriage family therapists to issue a temporary license to out-of-state licensees to practice in a nonprofit healthcare or counseling facility. The non-controlling bill makes the same conforming amendment we just saw, allowing the issuance of a license by reciprocity to a person establishing residence. And it also adds another code section to regulate that issuance. But this time, that's the conforming amendment that would be wiped out if the committee didn't vote to merge.
Questions on this, on the discussion? Questions?
We would ask that any motion to merge these sections as indicated here would include a request that the amendments be retroactive to the effective dates of their respective bills, because that would also be the legislative intent.
We'll entertain a motion. He so moves exactly what you said. Second, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We'll turn to Anders for LexisNexis. You here? Yeah, you are. There you are. I didn't see you. If you could speak at the podium, there's a mic there, I think, and then everyone can ask questions as you finish your presentation. Thank you. Should be working if you hit the button on it. Did it go green on?
There we go. It's
Yeah.
green.
We're good to go.
All right. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor and members. Thanks for being here today on this warm August afternoon. You have in your package a letter that I sent to Ronnie this spring, setting out the proposals for replacement volumes as we do every year. Typically, every year we replace between 5 or 6 volumes when they become too big, too old, or just when too much of the material is in the supplement. This year, which is standard, we propose replacing 5 volumes. There is some detail set out in the letter that you can consult. We're happy to answer any questions as well. So we're proposing to replace volumes 11A, 14, 15, 19B, and 20. You can see some detail on the appendix, how many pages are in each volume. Again, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. On your second prize, as always, we are entitled to ask for a price increase, which is subject to the committee's approval. This year, we're asking for a fairly modest price increase. I mean, I know it's tough times. We're balancing on the one hand the state finances in the pandemic era. At the same time, we as a producer and manufacturer are facing unprecedented cost increases, both in terms of labor, but raw materials, the sheer availability of people to actually do the work to get the code out in a timely manner has been certainly something that I have not seen in the 17 years I've been coming to this committee. So again, we kept the prices very low. We're mindful of the challenges, between 1% to 3% for the different components, which is far below the standard price increase that LexisNexis does for its overall products, which is significantly higher. So with that, I'll stop there. And if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
You have last year's prices, sir, so you can compare, Mr. Gann?
I do not, but anecdotally, I can say that I believe that the cumulative supplement for the state was $87.50. So it's an increase about $2.50, which is the largest part of the overall set.
If I've got your letter right, you maintained your costs on the full set of the code, is that correct?
Full set of the code is if you buy a new set, if you don't have one on the shelves today, that's the full set price, which is the top one. If you're a subscriber, you buy the cumulative supplement, the index, and the replacement volumes.
So the price is still $229.50 for the state government?
Correct.
Okay, and then as I see it, you went from $87 to $90 on the cumulative supplement,
Correct.
and you went from $22.25 to $22.50 on the general index, and you went from $11 to $12 on the advanced legislative services advance sheets, and you went up from $22.75 to $23.25.50 on replacement volumes. Went up from $23.50 to $24 on the citator. And on your court rules, $23.50 to $24, and your advanced code services remain the same. Is that correct?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Yes, sir. Senator Fillingane.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you, Mr. Ganton. My question is, I'm assuming, and maybe it's the wrong assumption, that with the advent of the internet and everything going online, are you seeing a precipitous drop in the number of users who are purchasing the actual hardbound volumes of the code, both in the private sector part of your business and in the government sector?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true, right? I think print, generally speaking, has seen a decline that's been ongoing for probably the better part of 2 decades. It's been a slow churn. Occasionally you see a bigger drop, like 2008, 2009, at the last recession, we saw a fairly big drop. It's too soon to say what this recession is really doing. Last year was so unique in so many ways, but yes, it is declining. It's declining at a steady pace.
Are you seeing other states that you do business with moving away from the hardbound volumes and simply go into the online version?
No, we haven't actually seen that, not for codes. You see that for some products like case reporters, for instance, right? Because a case, it never changes. I mean, and frankly, if you look up a case, you can look it up online, you can shepherdize it, you can see the subsequent history. For the code sets, what we find is that people really do like a mix of products. when you think about attorneys, you see some attorneys, they use only online. There are some that still only use print, but a lot of times, a lot of people, they use a combination of the two because oftentimes if you work in one practice area, I think a lot of attorneys find that if you just have the book, just grab it, you probably find it quicker than having to boot up your computer, log into your online research. So it's a mix. I mean, it's a decline. And one of the things we're finding, and I think all publishers are finding, is that ebooks, for instance, has never really taken off as a format. I mean, we do make it available to some extent, but it's either print, traditional print, or just like pure legal research.
So what is your charge that your company makes for just making your sets available online versus the hardbound versions?
So two things on that, right? So we do, as part of the contract, we provide a free version of the Mississippi Code on the internet. On the online part, it's a simple question with a very complicated answer, because the way that we and other firms in our industry sell it, you can't just necessarily go and buy one content set. It tends to be packaged with a lot of things. I mean, you buy like a Mississippi library that has the code, the admin code, the AG decisions, practice materials, forms, guidance. So, and again, it depends on how many attorneys, how big of a firm. So it's really hard to make any sort of apples to apples comparison.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor.
In that regard, how many does the state purchase?
How many sets?
Yeah.
Help you out. Yeah, that's the order of magnitude. Yeah, that sounds about right.
And that's, we don't bet, that's not new sets of the code, is it? That's just the cumulative supplements. I mean, updates, right? Right. A replacement of some sort. Right. 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 Okay, I hope everybody understood that this full set of the code remained at the same price. The cumulative supplements went up about $3. And and that's probably where our 1,400 purchases come from. Okay, everybody else, any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, do we need a motion on this? Need a motion to approve the purchase at the levels proposed by Mr. Anders. Is there a motion? Mr. Reynolds? In a second by Representative Cockerham. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. And on the same terms that we just discussed, I had been discussing an opt-in and opt-out for individuals to do what Senator Fillingane was asking directly. So Ronnie, you want to discuss the opt-out provisions?
Yes, sir. You brought that up at one point in the meeting last year. You asked me several times about if somebody doesn't want the code, should we give it to them? And so Ian and I have looked into what would be required to change the current setup or arrangement, I guess is better. Out of that 1,400 sets, 14 plus 100 sets that we purchase, there are statutory requirements for most of them, and there's a couple that are only in the contract, like the Advanced Code Service, I believe is only in the contract. But the main section that governs our purchases is section 1-1-11. And it's just a list. It's not in a handout, but it's just a list of all the code recipients, the public subscribers, if you will, the recipients of the blue set of the code that we get the 50% discount on, and it's about 1,400 sets. And there is already, and y'all amended, well, actually the legislature amended it last year. There's a provision in subsection 2 at the end that is an opt-in provision now, and it's been in there for quite a while, but it's limited to each state elected official, which are the statewide elected officials, each state district official and member of the legislature, they have to opt in. It had some language saying that you would get the CD, and that had to be amended to eliminate the CD last year, but the language on the opt-in was not changed. At the beginning of that section, which is by far most of the recipients of the 1,400 sets of the code, and that's state agencies as well as local officials, it says, except as provided in the opt-in provision that I just told you about, the joint committee shall distribute or provide for the distribution of the sets of the compilation of the code purchased by the state as follows. And then it lists the number of sets that each recipient gets. The House gets 57 sets, the Senate gets 40. Then there's some lower numbers for some other offices, and most of them are 1 or 2 sets. I think all the locals are 1 set each, to each, like Chancery Clerk, Sheriff, a variety of local officials. So the operative word there is shall distribute or provide. There's a statutory duty on the committee to provide these sets. So whether you do opt-in, opt-out, if you make any change, well, I say the committee can't do this. It would require a statutory change because it says shall, but if it's done, it would have to be an amendment to this statute, whether it's opt-in or opt-out. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, you mentioned to me, like when you were Secretary of State, you were talking about distribution. I guess you meant the general laws and journals, because the code has been under the Code Committee since '98. But last session, actually this year, that requirement for the Secretary of State to distribute sets of the journals and the general laws, it's a mandate also, like the code. But we were getting, by law, 12 sets for every committee room in the Capitol. And we got 12 for the House and 12 for the Senate. And it was, these books would last 100 years. They're well designed. And frankly, we have to throw them away when we get them. So I asked somebody, John Reed, to introduce a bill, and now that is an opt-out for the sets of the general laws and journals for the individual recipients. And for the committees, we changed that to a mandate to an opt-in. If the clerk and the secretary of the Senate want them, they can opt in. Otherwise, those are not wasted anymore. We've saved 24 sets by changing that. But what I wanted to point out to you is there was an opt-out provision added, and it's in addition to some others that I'm not going to summarize read everything, but it says any other recipient of the general laws and journals listed in this subsection 1 may waive the receipt of the general laws, journals, or both by written request to the Office of Secretary of State. So any change one way or the other on receipt of the code is an opt-in, opt-out, would need to be an amendment to this section 1111 by the legislature. That's really the background for it and the mechanics of how it would be done. Did you have any more questions
No,
of me?
you're right. You're accurate. When we were Secretary of State, serving that capacity, we did ask if, like, for example, the sheriffs wanted them, the DAs wanted them, the assistant DAs and whatnot. And we got probably about a third rejected them for either not use or duplicative reasons. So I think Mr. Frith is correct here. Anticipate there'll be legislation this year to allow for opt-in and opt-out provisions. And that legislation, he's got it sectionalized there, section 1-1-11. For example, the Secretary of State may not need 7, whatever, all of these that are in there, with a view towards people who need them. Certainly we want to have them. They're sitting in the corner over here. But where they're not needed is just as you explained, in some rooms, we don't need to order them or pay for them. So that, I think you're right. It'd be, I have some tentative language that I'll give to our committee this year to allow opt-in and opt-out for everyone. It's online, so some of our younger people are reading online more than they read anything else. Any questions about this? There's no action, I think, at this point. Simply to tell you that's where we're headed. Any questions, Senator Sparks, anybody? I want to move then to an additional business. Strangely enough, we get these, a speaker and I get them all the time, but we get these requests for public records. And in this instance, there has been some Supreme Court litigation or litigation on this matter about public records and the disclosure of the Lexus information and also the information that we prepare here by outside parties. So I asked Mr. Jones to please prepare a joint legislative committee compilation public records provision that we would live under here for disclosure of public records, because we want to disclose all the records that are public and required to be disclosed. But there are also obviously matters that go back and forth between our group, between Ronnie and others that may or may not want to be released and are not subject. So I'm going to ask Ian to please explain the one. I believe each of you has that in you, and I'd ask you to turn to it as the public records. Is it in the packet?
It's not in the packet. I just handed it out.
Would you go, if everybody take a look at that, it's dated August the 20th, 2021. And this would be the committee's standards concerning a public records request. Ian, would you go through it, please, sir?
So we received a request a few weeks ago. I believe, Ronnie, I think you said the Code Committee has never received a Public Records Act request before. So this was new ground. So it put us on notice that it would be a good idea to have a policy that we could apply uniformly and consistency in the future if we got another request. Under the Mississippi Code, under the Public Records Act, there is a section carving out an exception for the legislature. That's section 2561.17, and it says, nothing in this chapter shall be construed as denying the legislature the right to determine the rules of its own proceedings and to regulate public access to its records. However, notwithstanding the provisions of this section, the legislature shall be subject to the provisions of sections 27-104-151 through 27-104-159. And what it's referring to is the Mississippi Accountability Act, Mississippi Accountability and Transparency Act of 2008. And so that's the reason for the first paragraph of this policy. Requested records that are required to be made available under the Act of 2008 shall be provided. Alternatively, for access to these records, the requester may be referred to the Department of Finance Administration website established under 27-104-155, because the law already requires to be made available to the public. The rest is really up to us, up to the legislature to decide how it wants to regulate the public availability of its records. For this joint committee, we decided that minutes of meetings and handouts, what you've all received here, those are public documents. We can certainly and easily make those available. They're certainly public. Other documents, we don't think we want to be, if we get a request, emailing each of you, asking you to search your inboxes for emails related to the Mississippi Code, the publication of the code, preparing the code for publication. That's not something that the Public Records Act requires us to do. And a lot of those communications, if not all of them, can be claimed privileged or confidentiality or both. The legislative process involves lots of considerations that are confidential, involves lots of communications that are not public records. So we decided to tailor this policy fairly narrowly to provide what's clearly public, which is what's been produced in these public meetings.
So we'll entertain questions from the committee concerning adoption of a public records process for the committee. Any questions? Mr. Speaker, you're recognized.
Give me an example of what we're talking about here. What is subject to production, what is not?
The minutes of the meetings and the paper you have in front of you, the packet you received and what I just handed out to you. Those are what we're producing. The contract with Lexus, which, that's right. That's right, thank you.
Could you give an example of what's not to you?
Everything else,
Communication, right, everything else, the communications with the publisher about preparing the code for publication.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Other questions? Other questions? Floor is open for a motion to adopt the policy. Motion? Senator Kirby moves to adopt. A second? We have a second, Senator Fillingham. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. Okay, any additional business from anyone? Any additional business? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by Senator Reynolds. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? And the ayes have it.